Welcome in to another episode here of Home Field Advantage. Just checking up on my technical situation here. Welcome in to another episode here of Home Field Advantage. Hope you're all having a great week or weekend, however and whenever you may be listening to this great podcast across our great country or our great land. My name is Will Highland. If you're watching with us on YouTube, thanks for tuning in and catching us here. Please drop down below and hit the subscribe button. And if you're listening to us on audio, whether that be on Spotify, Apple, Google, Stitcher, wherever you get your podcasts, appreciate you checking in with us, there. So please go subscribe there as well. But we have a different kind of show today. The last few weeks, we've had a wide array of topics. We talked NBA and NFL with Diesel and Cam 2 weeks ago. And then last week with Josh Ricker, we talked all things soccer. So we've had a pretty busy couple weeks. I've had some guests on, a little bit out of practice, if I'm being quite honest. We've also had some Survivor podcasts out over at our sister channel, Making Fire, a Survivor podcast. So if you're a Survivor fan and you like the television show that airs on CBS every week, it's a great place to go listen to my analysis of that season as well. But for today, we're going to stick in the sports world with a couple of big topics. College football playoff, we'll close out with that. That race is getting tighter and tighter and more complex as the weeks go on. Some big losers in the years of college football over my lifetime. But this year, it seems like there's some big schools that probably won't find their way into the playoffs. So we'll talk a little bit about that. Also talk about Xander Bogaerts and revisit that whole subject. That's been a topic of conversation that I've really enjoyed hashing out on this program. So we'll spend a few minutes on that as well. And then we will talk about the Knights and the Bruins being the two best teams in the NHL. First place I want to start, though, so I want to start with two lessons I learned, all right? And they happened this week. Now, this week was a little bit of a different week in the world, right? We had an election. It was dark outside at 4 o'clock. Like sports, obviously continued. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about that, of course. But life continues too. And so there's two lessons that I learned that I think, I can relate to the sports world in that, they are transcendent of many different things. So the first lesson I learned this week is be yourself, right? That sounds really elementary. It's something that everyone tells us from the time we're little kids in grade school all the way up until, we're at workplace functions and, seminars and, HR people telling us these things. But it is really important, to be authentic. Just as a lesson that I learned this week is, last week when we had Ricker on, I had a soccer, I guess it's up here. I had a soccer jersey up where that Bruins jersey is right now, if you're watching on YouTube. And look, I like Tottenham Hotspur. I like Harry Kane. He was the one who was up there. I watch the Premier League when I can. I enjoy that sport, but I'm not a soccer fan. My background here, I shouldn't say I'm not a soccer fan. I'm not a diehard soccer fan. I don't want to pretend to be one yet. I'm not one yet, right? So I need to be myself. I need to be authentic. I had a Harry Kane jersey up there when I was talking to Ricker, but if I'm going to be my authentic self here on YouTube in front of you all, or if you're listening on audio, I need to not try and be Colin Cowherd, right? I need to not try and be Jake Crane or any of these other sports podcasters that I listen to that I draw inspiration from. there's a lot of people in our field, in our medium, that try and be Barstool. They try and be, you name it, ESPN, Fox Sports, Clay Travis, Dan Patrick, like anybody else who's had a really successful program on the radio. People are trying to be those guys. I need to be myself. And so that's a lesson I learned this week. I commented, I did this most stupid thing that a millennial my age can ever do. And I commented on a post by the former governor of Ohio, John Kasich. And I liked John Kasich when he ran for president, 6 years ago. Like, he was a good dude, good governor, nice guy. So I liked his Facebook page. And then I commented on his status. And that's not, I don't live in Ohio. He wasn't my governor. It doesn't mean I can't entertain, my political interests that I might have and, comment on a Facebook post of his. It's not what I'm saying, but I am not from Ohio, so I'm not really well prepared to engage with the hordes of people that descended upon me. And my comment wasn't really all that negative either. So people just sought me out and started asking me questions and stuff. I'm like, I don't even live in Ohio. So maybe I shouldn't put myself into a debate that maybe I don't belong in, even if that wasn't my intention. Same thing in the sports world. We talk about it all the time. Kyrie Irving, right? He's finding himself in a lot of hot water because he opened his mouth and put himself in a situation that he shouldn't have been in, which got him in some trouble, which is kind of hard to square because if you ask Kyrie Irving, he's doing what I'm saying that I learned how to do, which is being himself. So I guess that's just a long way of saying that, look, we all have opinions. That's awesome, but we need to be authentic. Like, I don't belong in a political debate about the state of Ohio because I don't live in the state of Ohio. If I have any listeners in the Buckeye State, I'm happy that you're with me, and it's great. You guys can all engage in that discourse if you want to, but that's not a place for me. I hate the phrase "stick to sports" because it's usually like turned into something negative. But in this case, I'm gonna not find myself in a political debate that I'm not prepared to engage in. So that's lesson number one: is just be yourself and be authentic, and don't try and be somebody different, and don't join a discourse that you're unprepared in talking about. We see that all the time in sports media. People walk into a debate online or on TV about sports or anything else that they're not prepared in, and they get shown the door. So that didn't necessarily happen to me, but it's just not what I'm going to spend my afternoons doing. So that's lesson number one. Lesson number two is, I think a lot of us have figured this out over the last few years, but running an operation is oftentimes a bleep show. I was at an ECHL hockey game last night. Now, I like the ECHL. I think it's a good brand of hockey. For those of you who don't know, it's essentially like the AA of hockey. There's the NHL, and then there's the AAHL, the American Hockey League, and then below that is the ECHL. There's not as many prospects in the ECHL, but there are some, really high-end pro players. And there was a moment in last night's game when the opposing team, I was there watching the Maine Mariners, but the opposing team was the Reading Royals, and they had a player who got severely injured. His face was bleeding. He was down face planted on the ice for like a few seconds at least before he even moved. It was really scary to be in the crowd. And so the training staff came out, they took care of him, they brought him off in a stretcher. was just a horrible scene. I hope he's okay. But what ended up happening is they resumed play, and then it seemed like either league officials or medical staff or somebody interrupted the game. They just interrupted the game, like with 2 minutes left in the first period. And the players went off the ice, and the PA announcer explained that the teams were heading to the intermission early and that they would restart and switch ends after that 2 minutes got played at the end of the intermission. It was all very confusing. But I guess my lesson is that when you're running an operation, communication matters. And so that communication, albeit late, was really instrumental in the crowd figuring out what was going on. Because, when you see players exit the ice and you see play stop and we're only a few minutes removed from an injury, some folks might have thought, oh my word, are they suspending the game? Is this guy hurt? And their mind suddenly goes to other places. But what was really good about this is that they communicated that part. However, we still never really figured it out as fans and as spectators. But it's one of those situations where when you're running an event, when you're running an operation, crap hits the fan. Stuff happens. Like look at my setup right now, right? Like if you've been with me in Home Field Advantage as a listener for multiple seasons now, first of all, thank you. You're the bomb. I'd give you a free T-shirt if I had them, or a free anything, just because I love having you all as listeners. But if you've been with us since the beginning, you know that sometimes my communication as a host sucks. I'll go weeks without giving a update on when we're going to do a new pod. I'll change up my topics. My social media strategy is, from 2008, right? But you guys still stick with me because you know that the product is still good. The product, it might look like, a disheveled, thrown together man cave behind me, because it is. We're not in a well-lit studio with, nice, cool graphics on the bottom if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, we don't have sexy commercials about, big brands that help us raise money so we can have a great, amazing guest come on sometime. We're a grassroots podcast that I started 4 years ago in my parents' upstairs in my childhood bedroom when I was in college and had no experience. And if you want to get technical, we're a 7 or 8 year old podcast that I began in college with Cam Chiesa and another guy, Dan Stadden, in the upstairs of the snack bar at our college on a laptop with no equipment. So yeah, communication matters if you're going to put on a good product, yes. But even if it's late or it's delayed or sometimes it's confusing, like it was at the Mariners game the other day, then you can get over that if the product is good. The ACHL has a great on-ice product. So by the end of it, I bet most fans might have still been a little bit confused about what happened on the ice, why the game was delayed after the injury, if the guy was okay, like why did we have a weird intermission? But the takeaway was probably that they had a good night of family fun. And so I guess my 2 lessons are, number 1, be yourself, be authentic. And number 2, communication matters. It really does. But the presentation, it's not always everything if what you're getting is still good. And so the presentation of that ECHL game was pretty clunky. But my podcast is also pretty clunky. But I think at the end, both products are hopefully pretty good. So That's where I'm at with that. All right, thanks for indulging me there. I'll try not to do any more of those. But um, hey, it's my show. I guess I can do what I want. Um, I'm gonna fast forward here. We're gonna jump right into sports topics because I spent several minutes talking about that enlightenment that I had over the last week. But first thing I want to talk about is the Bruins and the Vegas Golden Knights. Now, the Vegas Golden Knights had a really hot start to their franchise. They were amazing. They were really good for their first few years as an expansion team. They made the Stanley Cup final. They had some really, hardcore veteran players that came in and joined them. Guys like James Van Riemsdyk and Max Pacioretty and others. And then more recently they swung a trade for Jack Eichel, and they have Mark Stone and all these other players like Shea Theodore and Alec Martinez, and they've been very strong with their roster. They've pushed the limits of the salary cap, but they didn't have a great coach. But now they brought in Bruce Cassidy. Excuse me. Now, Bruce Cassidy, we all know, I've been beating this drum for a while. If you've listened to this program before, I think Bruce Cassidy's a hell of a coach. And the Vegas Golden Knights, believe, are 13-2. They are a wagon. They are scoring a ton. They are winning games in all different ways. Logan Thompson looks like a really good goaltender. Bruce Cassidy looks like he has the finger on the pulse in that dressing room. Something that he didn't necessarily have at the end of his time with the Bruins. And the Knights look like a juggernaut. Now enter the Boston Bruins, the team over my shoulder here. They are also a wagon. They bring in Jim Montgomery. They bring back Patrice Bergeron and David Krejci for one last dance. A lot of folks felt that the Bruins were going to get off to a really slow start because of their injuries. They had injuries to McAvoy, Marchand, Grzelcyk. All three of those guys are back now. They had Krejci that they missed for a little bit. They're missing Swayman, but Kincaid came in last night against the Sabres and got the job done as the new backup goalie while Swayman is shelved. So the Bruins have gotten over early. It's still really early, but they've gotten over some of those injury scares that a lot of folks felt were going to plague them. I always said that the Bruins could be really good if they could somehow navigate their injuries. Well, they've started 13-2. They are an absolute wagon, just like the Knights. And Jim Montgomery, as the new head coach, much like Bruce Cassidy in Vegas, seems to have the finger on the pulse in that dressing room. The Bruins are doing what a lot of NHL teams really, really want to do. Get way up in the standings early so that they can afford any pitfalls of injuries or inconsistent play that might happen in the middle of the season. I don't think it's realistic that either the Knights or the Bruins are going to play like 850 point percentage hockey the next 5 or 6 months. That's just not going to happen. But what might happen is that these teams level off a little bit and then have surges, then have winning streaks throughout the year that allow them to still finish at the top of their respective divisions. That's how good these both teams are playing right now. And I just want to point out 2 things. For all those people who thought Bruce Cassidy wasn't a good fit in Boston anymore, maybe you were right. But he's still a damn good NHL coach, and we're seeing that over in Vegas. And likewise, for all those people who said the Bruins were old, they should sell off their pieces while they still have them, I hope you're happy right now as the Bruins are 13-2 and they're winning. Not in spite of their older players, but in many reasons because of their older players. Nick Foligno has had a renaissance. David Krejci looks like he hasn't missed a step. Taylor Hall looks better. Patrice Bergeron almost had a hat trick last night. The Bruins are a wagon, and it's because of not only the introduction of Jim Montgomery into the dressing room, but also the core group of leadership that they have. And look, that situation last week with Mitchell Miller was an embarrassment. It was repugnant. Not a single Bruins fan that I talked to enjoyed that experience. But you know what stands out to me is that Bruins locker room, they were united. When Bergeron speaks, when Foligno speaks, when Krejci speaks, when Marchand speaks, those are the four leaders, in my opinion. They speak for the whole room. And so this Bruins team is not only unified behind their older players, they're also energized by a new system, a new offensive system, maybe in the same way that the Vegas Knights are energized by a new system under Cassidy. And dare I say it, we could be on a crash course for a 2023 Stanley Cup with the Vegas and the Golden Knights and the Boston Bruins. I would love that, but we are a long ways out. All right, moving on here. One thing we aren't a long ways out from, hopefully, is the end of this Xander Bogaerts contract drama. I've been pretty clear about this for really the last 6 to 8 months since it became a part of normal Boston sports discussion. I think Xander Bogaerts, much like Dennis Eckersley said, he's the Jeter of the Boston Red Sox. We've talked about this on our program before. We went through all the stats. If you're interested in hearing about that, you can head back to like late September, early October when I talked about this. Xander Bogaerts is the unequivocal leader of this Red Sox team. Much like Bergeron and Foligno and Marchand, like we just talked about with the Bruins, much like they are of the hockey team, Bogaerts is the leader of this Red Sox baseball team, and it's not particularly close. Now, there's been, over the course of his career, especially his early career, other great leaders in that clubhouse. Pedroia, Ortiz. The list goes on and on. Lester, if you want to throw it out there, even though it was sort of toward the end of Lester's time here, he was a good clubhouse leader. People liked him. You look at that 2018 team. You had, I think JD Martinez was a great leader in the clubhouse. I think Chris Sale is a great leader in the clubhouse. But right now, as we speak, as great as Rafael Devers is, and as promising as Tristan Casas is, the future leader of the Boston Red Sox is Xander Bogaerts. Like, we don't know how good Marcelo Meyer is going to be. Trevor Story, we know he's a shortstop by trade. Right now, Bogaerts is a must re-sign. He just won his 5th Silver Slugger this week. All right. So I am for the Red Sox being financially responsible. I'm not asking them to go out and drop millions of dollars, tens of millions of dollars on Pablo Sandoval and Hanley Ramirez. All right, Ben Cherington's not walking through that door. But I am also asking the Red Sox to put their money where their mouth is. As I've said before, you're the Boston freaking Red Sox. You can afford to have your best players stay. The 5 biggest contracts in team history, not a single one was for a homegrown player. Not a single one. Chris Sale, David Price, Manny Ramirez, Adrian Gonzalez, Carl Crawford, Pablo Sandoval, Hanley Ramirez, technically. Not a single one of those players was a homegrown player. The time is now for the Red Sox to pay their players. Pay Xander. And one other thing I'll point out is I'm not buying into the Twitter speculation. First of all, we don't even know who's verified and who's not on Twitter, for crying out loud. I'm not buying into that speculation. It seems like every week some, third-party Red Sox Twitter account run by some blogger in Marshfield, Massachusetts is out here with a new take about how, or a new quote about how Chaim Bloom said this, or John Henry did that, or John Henry's selling Liverpool, so who's going to be able to afford Xander. No, that's not how this works. It also seems like there's a new baseball writer every week putting out new information about how far away the two sides are. Until the Red Sox themselves announce the signing of Xander Bogaerts, or until another MLB team themselves announce the signing of Xander Bogaerts, everything else is just a rumor. So I don't deal in hypotheticals that much, even though it's fun. I don't like it. I like to tell you guys straight what I believe. And what I believe is there's absolutely no excuse for the Red Sox not to sign Xander Bogaerts. I don't want some nerd from Northeastern to tweet me about how his defensive run saved isn't that great. Well, you know what? I don't give a you-know-what about his defensive run save, to be quite honest. Because you think Derek Jeter was an analytics darling? Was Ozzie Smith an analytics darling? No. Really, what would we say these days if a guy like Babe Ruth walked up to bat? Well, he might hit 60 home runs a year, but I'm really concerned about his exit velocity. Who cares? Xander Bogaerts, and I know if you're like a baseball analytics guy and you just heard me say that, you're like pulling your hair out because you're probably like, oh well, if he hits so many home runs, that means his exit velocity is great. Awesome. I'm not talking about that right now. What I'm talking about is the X factor. No pun intended. Xander Bogaerts provides an X factor that a lot of other shortstops in the majors don't. Is he the best defensive player? Probably not. Does he hit for as much power as he did maybe 3 or 4 years ago? Probably not. But as I've said before, he's a glue that holds that room together. You know what the Red Sox have been the majority of my adult life? Inconsistent. Last place, first place, last place, first place. And a lot of you are probably like, okay, well, Xander's been there the whole time, right? If he's so consistent, why are the Red Sox so up and down? It's because they fail to make good business decisions. Hanley, Rusney Castillo, Panda, David Price, Chris Sale. These have been some questionable business decisions. I'm not going to go down the Chris Sale rabbit hole. Hopefully you all know how I feel about that. But this Xander Bogaerts situation, it's really a non-negotiable. He's like Jason Varitek. He's like David Ortiz. He's like Dustin Pedroia. That's where he is. All right. Homegrown player for the most part. I know Ortiz and Varitek weren't homegrown, but in terms of their value to the franchise, they might as well have been. That's what Xander Bogaerts is. And so there's really no excuse. And so just get it done, guys. Get it done. I don't care about the Penguins. I don't care about Liverpool. I don't care about if he's going to buy the Washington Commanders. I don't care about Fenway Sports Group. I don't care about Chaim Bloom and some analytics thing, or the baseball staff or any of this stuff, or the fact that, we're out here still talking about it 8 months after, it hit the news. Xander Bogaerts needs to be a Boston Red Sox. And so let's get to it, guys. All right. I'm running out of gas here. I think you guys can tell. It's been a long ass weekend. This daylight savings time has kicked my ass. I just gotta be honest. But speaking of kicking ass, I think college football and intrigue has kicked ass this year. It's been way more interesting. Perhaps it's because I followed it more closely, but it's been pretty cool from the start. I got to admit, I've been intrigued all year long. And maybe because all 4 of the teams that I once said I was a free agent fan for have been competitive. I kind of like Tennessee. I've always kind of liked TCU. I mean, Michigan, Brady went there, Bama, Mac Jones went there. Like, I've kind of had a rooting interest in all these schools over the years in varying volumes. And this year they've kind of all been a factor, so perhaps that's why. But we've had some really good games, like Texas and TCU yesterday, Tennessee and Bama a few weeks ago. I mean, we've had LSU and Bama. Like, there's just been some great games. And so I'm going to go through the top 10 right now, the CFP top 10, and just go through real fast, like what I'm thinking here for the top 10 and how I think it's going to shake out. I opened my phone, and if you're watching on YouTube, that wasn't a great decision because I just got more Facebook notifications from my folks over in Ohio that I've never met. Like, I might know on one hand, I can probably count the amount of people I know from Ohio. Nothing wrong against the great people of Ohio. I'm not from there, so I don't want to engage anymore, so I'm not going to. Anyway, NCAA football top 25 CFP. This might actually be last week's rankings. I actually don't know. I think it's last week's rankings, but maybe we'll just go off these. I mean, Alabama barely beat Ole Miss yesterday. So I don't know if I don't know. Well, let me just start. Number one overall, undisputed in my opinion, is Georgia. Georgia's the best team in the country. They kind of have been all year long. They had a little bit of a situation in the middle of the year when they almost lost to Mizzou and almost lost to, I want to say, Vanderbilt, if I remember correctly. But since then, they've gotten around. Georgia, undisputed number one. Now, number 2 and 3 are OSU, speaking of Ohio, and Michigan. Maybe this is another opinion about Ohio that might not go over well, but I think Ohio is the second best team in the country. But if they lose to Michigan, they aren't going to be in the playoff. I think the winner of Ohio State and Michigan makes the playoff. I think the loser doesn't. I think a lot of people around the country agree. All right, number 4 last week was TCU. Well, they won again, and to be quite honest, I think TCU is deserved of a playoff spot. Now they go on the road at Baylor next week, and then they go home against Iowa State. They are going to make the Big Ten championship, but I do not know who they'll play. It's very likely that they finish undefeated if they get by Baylor. And so TCU, for the first time in really 8 years, finds themselves in the playoff mix. Tennessee 5. I think if Tennessee wins out, I think if you're going to put a one-loss team, because this is how it goes now. You're probably going to end up with 3 undefeated teams, being Georgia, OSU, or Michigan, and TCU. So those 3 are going to get in. You're either going to get Georgia, Ohio State, Michigan, call it Big Ten champ, and TCU as a Big 12 champ are probably going to get in. Then it's going to get interesting because you're going to have Clemson, Tennessee, the Big Ten loser, probably Michigan, and you're going to have, let's see, Oregon. Did Oregon lost to Washington, so I don't think you're going to have Oregon anymore either. But you're going to end up with UGA at number 1, Georgia at number 1, Ohio State at number 2, probably. Then I think you go TCU 3 if they're undefeated. And then the decision basically comes down to 3 schools. It comes down to USC, Tennessee, or Clemson as to who gets in. No, it comes down to 4 schools. It comes down to Michigan, Tennessee, USC, or Clemson as a one-loss school that gets in. Now, what's going to be really hard, let's just go through these schools, is that Michigan and Tennessee aren't going to win their conference. USC might win their conference, and Clemson definitely, in my opinion, is going to win their conference. So how do you let a one-loss non-conference champ get in over a one, and then have them not get in, and then have a one-loss non-conference champ like Tennessee or Michigan get in instead? That's the big question. And so I think what's going to happen is you're going to see probably USC or Clemson, make it as a number 4, even though Tennessee's only losses to the number 1 team and Michigan's only losses to the number 2 team. It's not going to be enough because they're not conference champs. Now, I could be wrong. In my opinion, biases aside, I think Tennessee should be the number 4 school. Their only loss is to Georgia. You get them again in a neutral field, technically. They won't be playing at Sanford Stadium again. You'd have a 1-4. I think maybe the only way Tennessee doesn't get in is if, weirdly enough, Georgia doesn't go undefeated, but I don't think that's going to happen. I think Georgia wins the SEC championship game pretty easily. But I guess we're splitting hairs. But essentially, you're going to have number 1 Georgia, number 2 Ohio State, number 3 TCU, and then you're going to have 4 teams vying for number 4, and those are going to be Michigan, Tennessee, USC, and Clemson. All right, that's going to do it for this episode here. I know it's all over the place. If you've stayed this long, I really appreciate it. I can't express enough how much it means to me to have the amount of support that I have in this endeavor from my listeners. You guys are the best. I would be nowhere without you. And so for that, I give you a ton of thanks. And in exchange for that thanks and gratitude, I hope you go over and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. And if you're watching here on YouTube, down below, as always, you can follow us online at all of our socials at Homefield Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. We look forward to connecting with you over there. But until next time, I hope you all have a great rest of your week or weekend. We'll catch you on the next edition of Home Field Advantage.